Right, hello, greetings. Shalom, salam, Shanti. It's Dr Daffern speaking. It's my weekly broadcast on philosophy and contemporary global issues. It's a couple of days late today because this Sunday we had a big feast here in France to the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. It's a big feast day in Europe. So everything was shut, so I had a little holiday and didn't record it on Sunday. So today, instead I'm recording it on the following Tuesday, the 18th of August. But better late than never is my philosophy. So I'm going to be addressing, several things. Beirut, peacemaking in the Middle East, some of the books I'm working on, and the COVID thing, and the whole variety of Brexit, the whole sort of set of monsters. Really, it feels like we're all meditating, and on the eve of enlightenment, all these monsters are coming to get us, which is what happened to Buddha on the eve of his enlightenment experience, and he just touched the ground each time, and they turned into flowers. Maybe we need to do the same, because the absurd antics of the monsters are over the top. Things like COVID, and now a Beirut bombing where a whole port is destroyed. Shocking. Okay, so I'm going to start by just hoping that you are well, and surviving in these difficult times. And in whatever way you find. My work as an intellectual is to, in fact, it's made very little difference to my work as a writer and philosopher, in that I'm on a sort of retreat, as it were, doing my work and writings and thinking about the whole global situation and how we can improve it. So that's carrying on. I want to start by talking about the Beirut bombing, which I followed with shock and horror, and I've seen, obviously, what we've all seen, sort of videos and things. I think the world is in suspended animation yet again as to its causality. We have various theories, natural accident, triggering sort of, cataclysmic explosion. Then there are theories about, no, this was a foreign power that was attacking with missiles. And there are people on the internet with visual, confirmation of that. Then there are people with, even weirder theories, like, So you can research it. And there are people that feel passionately about this. And then, so the fact is, of course, once again, like 9/11, we don't know. We, the people, the average person, hasn't got a clue who to believe anymore. The news is all filtered through, whichever organisation is doing it from whatever perspective. So I endorse President Macron's appeal when he went immediately to Beirut. He's the president of the country. I live in France. He's an intelligent chap, and he said immediately we need an international commission of inquiry into this tragedy. Of course we do, and I've actually written to Macron, giving him support, backing him up as European coordinator of the World Intellectual Forum. We need to get a commission of inquiry set up immediately. And of course then the Lebanese government falls and there's chaos and, who's going to do it? So my proposal is that I think that Lebanon should be involved. Obviously, it's their turf. I also think that France and the European Union should sit on that commission and make it an international commission. I think Canada should. I think, other kind of neutral countries, I don't know, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland. Sort of independent, verifiably neutral kind of countries that would like to know the facts and the truth behind it. And I've written to Macron proposing that be set up and pledging support. Now, I do so with my hat on as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, which I set up back in 2008. I suppose rather naively thinking that, it's time that all the religious leaders and philosophers and intellectuals sit down and discuss truth. We kind of come up with an agreement, we sign an interfaith peace treaty, and all the politicians stop making war on each other. You know, that was the sort of model. What I hadn't realised is how corrupt and ignorant and stupid people are, including politicians, but also, sadly, some religious leaders. And their motivations are always so mixed. They also don't always act from reason. They act from unconscious desires, almost at self-harming. I mean, there's a weird dialectic going on in history where people are, you know, we zigzag towards truth. We don't go in a straight line, which is something I'll come back to later when I discuss Sartre and Hegel and some of my work in ethics that I'm doing at the moment as a philosopher. But on the Middle East, I'm just saying, as an intellectual, as a philosopher, we need an international commission of inquiry into this thing. And meanwhile, the port area should be utterly sealed. Lorries shouldn't go in taking away debris like happened on 9/11. You know, that area should be sealed immediately. And police, the Lebanese army should absolutely secure that perimeter and prevent anyone taking away evidence. Now, you know, I absolutely suspend judgment on what caused this explosion. One theory is that, well, I think we can rule out the fireworks because we've seen, you know, images of firework explosions. It didn't look like that at all. You know, very possibly it was an attack on a Hezbollah weapons stash, which somehow Israeli intelligence hadn't realised that actually, hang on, it's right by an ammonium nitrate warehouse with, you know, thousands of tons of the stuff. That's possible. Accidental fire starting it off, I think, is unlikely. I think this was a deliberate act, but I do think it probably triggered out of hand. You know, discuss. I mean, these are some of the issues, and if anyone has any better proposals, I mean, I've seen the editor of Veterans Today, who's, you know, Gordon something or other, giving a very, you know, detailed breakdown of why he thinks it was intervention by a foreign power into Lebanon's airspace triggering this accident. I mean, he seems to know what he's talking about. You know, he's a veteran, and I have great respect for veterans. They're the professionals. So anyway, yeah, an international commission of inquiry. Meanwhile, aid helping Lebanon get over this unbelievable traumatic tragedy. I've just discovered a beautiful French naturalist, actually, who I keep coming across him, you know, as one does. He was... yeah, a French intellectual and natural scientist, Pierre Bellon, 1517 to 1564, who was a famous, you know, at the time when everyone was beginning to reclaim science and wonder, Aristotle's ideas of like classifying everything, categorizing, studying what everything is and where it belongs in a species. So that was being applied to the plant world. And this guy, Bellon, really, he was the first to really map in a comprehensive way the plants of the Middle East. He was sent by a cardinal in France here, who were great patrons of learning, to Lebanon and to tour the Middle East, and he got all these specimens. And it was him who brought back the cedar of Lebanon to Europe for the first ever time. He brought back cuttings of the tree, he was able to grow it, and he described the cedar of Lebanon, which is a magnificent tree, and it's on their flag. And dear old, you know, dear old Pierre Bellon, on behalf of the French academics, would be utterly appalled to think that somebody had deliberately done that to a city. I mean, it is, you know, I mean, we don't accept Hiroshima, which flattened Hiroshima. We don't accept Nagasaki. Why should we accept the destruction of Beirut? We wouldn't say of the Hiroshima bombing, oh, it's just an accident. You know, I mean, you know, you'd have to be mad. I don't see why we should say of Beirut that it's just an accident, unless you're deliberately trying to cover up and you know, silence critical thinking. Well, I'm a philosopher. Sorry, you can't silence critical thinking. You know, it will come back and bite you. We have a duty actually to think this thing through critically, and I appeal to all the intellectuals in the Middle East to get behind an international commission of inquiry, including in Israel, because people in Israel also have a right and a duty to discover the truth about this thing. Their neighbour just up the road, who's been demonised in their media for decades, I think unwarrantedly. Israel and Lebanon need to make a peace treaty, and now, it's long overdue. And if it turns out that somehow Israel had something to do with this, then they should make reparations and apologise. And whoever was responsible for authorising that in the Israeli establishment, whatever branch of skullduggery, should be imprisoned. I mean, it's illegal what they've done. Now, if they have no involvement, and if it was some other foreign power, that's possible. I mean, I can't think who, but because there is the whole business about the oil off Lebanon's shores, which was about to be exploited and brought through the port of of Beirut, and Israel was objecting and claiming the right to some of that sea and oil. I mean, hang on, that's not Israel's territory. It's not in any shape or form in international law anything to do with Israel. But it does give a sort of motive for why they might have said, well, you're going to exploit the oil, and with Russian help and French help, we'll blow the port up then. I mean, it's a sort of it makes Machiavelli look like a super celestial angel. I mean, it's kind of it's the lowest level of behaviour in international relations, and we shouldn't let people get away with it anymore. I mean, enough is enough is enough. Enough is enough already, as they say in New York. Right, so, okay, moving on. Macron was down on the south of France yesterday, commemorating the liberation of a little town, Bourg-le-Mimosa, down on the Côte d'Azur, a part of France I know and love. We used to go on holiday there. And so, as I said, I've written to him and suggested that, to give support to this brave proposal. Now, I want to mention also the Israel as okay, so I have good friends in Israel. I've been there many times, and they write to me and say, no, this can't have been Israel. We don't do that kind of thing. We're the good guys. Well, that seems to be a way of thinking that some Israelis adopt. There is evidence, however, that not all Israelis are the good guys, just as not all Brits or all French. There's a mixture of good and evil in every human society, it seems to me. In America, look at it. It's a mixture. Russia. I mean, everyone has a litany of villains. And I was brought up to think the British were the good guys, and we were never villains, until I read a bit more in world history. And coming to France was a bit of a shock when I discovered some of our so-called war heroes are actually criminals. Henry V, mass slaughter of French prisoners. The Black Prince, mass slaughter of the people of Limoges when he captures it. And so on and so on. So, no, there are no absolutely good guys or absolutely bad guys. There's a mixture. And the question is, who has the balance of power at any one time? In 1920s, 30s Germany, there were lots of good guys, some bad guys, and somehow the bad guys got control. I would say the same has happened in the UK now. There's a mixture of good and bad guys. The bad guys won control at the moment under the Tory government. And they're quite vicious and ruthless in their being bad, and they trumpet it as if it's like good, and the same in America. So this is very interesting. I'm very interested in ethics and history, and I'll be coming back to that point. But what I'm saying is that we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. I'm pleased if Israel wants to sign a peace treaty of some kind with the United Arab Emirates, where I've been many times, en route to India, stopping at Dubai and so on. I love the Emirates. It's wonderful to think that Israel can sign a treaty of peace and that they can visit each other's country or whatever. It might help civilize the whole region. I would like a peace treaty to be signed by every Middle Eastern country with each other. What I'm slightly suspicious of is a kind of Israeli geopolitical attempt to take out individual Arab states, get them to sign a peace treaty, all of them being Sunni, so that then they can have a collective attack on Iran. I can see the way Netanyahu's thinking. He's thinking, I tell you what, we'll get all these little Arab nations to sign a peace treaty with us, then we'll launch our attack on Iran. And of course they won't be able to help, they'll all be silenced. He's it's obvious that's what he's planning. And I'm saying no, not acceptable. The pathological hatred of Netanyahu for Iran, I think, is unjustified. The long and ancient history of Iranian-Israeli good relations, the fact that Israel, there are synagogues in Iran, in Tehran, there's, a lively and healthy Jewish community there, as well as a Zoroastrian and a Christian community. Iran has a better record on interfaith relations than most other Islamic states in the Middle East. So why is Israel demonizing Iran, and why is the American government of every persuasion helping them? Discuss. I mean, does it just go back to they're annoyed that the Shah was kicked out of power? But the Shah was in the end, he'd gone slightly bonkers, and his police were doing unmentionable stuff. The people have a right to rebel and resist when dictators start overdoing it, as they do perhaps discuss in Belarus at the moment, where the Belarusian people are saying enough is enough. Lukashenko, please go to Moscow. We want our country back. And there needs to be some investigation into the what seems to have been a fraudulent election, and a fair election should be reheld, and Lukashenko should be allowed to step down with dignity and honour. I mean, he's steered that country. So far as I know, he doesn't have blood on his hands. He's not like a Stalin figure. He's just believed in socialism and wanted a Belarusia that was a sort of the last bastion of the socialist experiment. Well, Lukács, the great Marxist intellectual, would say, well done, Lukashenko, you held out long, But probably it's time to throw in the towel now and retire. You can get a job at University of Moscow Institute of Philosophy studying Belarusian philosophy and Marxism or something, He's obviously quite a clever chap. I hope he doesn't just sit in his palace surrounded by tanks as they mow down the youngsters. I mean, it's the youth that are doing this revolution. And I also hope that Western, agencies are not involved in promoting this as sort of, geopolitically in their interest. No, stay out, be neutral. I don't agree with Craig Murray on this. Craig Murray, I don't know, he was a diplomat. He seems to think that it's absolutely legitimate for ambassadors to interfere in other countries' political life. I don't agree with that. I think ambassadors have a right and a duty to speak out when a given country is abusing power and human rights. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that, one has the right to sort of engineer their destruction in covert actions, including propaganda and, internet warfare. So I don't know. I think Craig Murray and I think differently on several things, but I do admire his defence of Assange and his overall position. Okay, so yeah, I think that the Middle East needs a truth and a peace settlement, and that's the other reason I've just published my detailed commentary on the Trump peace plan, which he announced in January this year with Netanyahu. It was a detailed, 90-page document. I've been through the whole thing in great detail. I've studied, I've analysed every clause and sentence as a philosopher and as an intellectual interest in peacemaking, and I've asked difficult questions. I'm a Socratic philosopher. I just ask the difficult questions. And it seems to me that Trump and Netanyahu were not genuinely serious in trying to present a plan that could actually lead to peace. Or they would have invited the Palestinians to be involved in the drafting. Discuss, maybe they thought that if they invited the Palestinians to the drafting, it would never get written. There'd just be argument after argument. Now, okay, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt, say that was the thinking. So having drafted the document, now you convene a meeting of all the Palestinian, diplomacy people, the experts, the intellectuals, the guys that deal with peace policy for Palestine. You give them the document, you sit down with them, you get your Israeli intellectuals, the peace ones, and then you have all the meetings that you should have had beforehand, but now, okay, you didn't, so you've got the document, you then have it. And I think that should be happening. Now, of course, the trouble is the Palestinians were so annoyed at the document because it's so, well, for various reasons, the way it was presented and so on. So they just said, no, we're not even looking at it. Well, I'm not a Palestinian. I'm a neutral, I'm a European, I'm a British Canadian who loves Palestine and Israel equally and wants to see a fair, just and lasting peace settlement in my lifetime. I'm sick of this. It's gone on long enough, you know. I want to be able to go as a tourist to Israel and Palestine and, you know, and shake hands with them all. I want my Palestinian brothers and sisters to be treated fairly, and I want the Israelis to be treated fairly, and I want them to grow up and make peace. So I've gone through this document with a fine-tooth comb, and I've commented on it, where I think it's good and positive. And I think there's lots of things in this document that are quite good, actually. I mean, I know, you know, one doesn't like Trump in polite circles, and I certainly don't. But he's done some good things in this document. And if he could pull off this, I mean, I think it was terribly advised about the protocol and the way, but his instinct of trying to get a peace settlement in the Middle East, you know, his instinct was, I think, a good one. I'm not going to, you know, join the sort of people that would say it's all a cynical exercise. No, I think there's a part of Trump that wants to go down in history as a peacemaker, and that's why he hasn't really so far launched any major wars. Although, you know, he's done stuff that I completely and utterly disapprove of, like ending the peace agreement with Iran, like ending the nuclear treaty with Russia, and then also throwing rockets and stuff around in Syria and, you know, acting as a bully. So anyway, I've commented on it and I've published it. I published it like yesterday, and it's available on the internet. You can just go to my publication site, which is www.lulu.com/spotlight/IPSGP, the acronym of my institute, IIPSGP. And it'll come up along with 60 other books I've published. Okay, so yeah, and I mention, you know, my views really on the bigger picture of Middle Eastern peacemaking in that critique which I've just published. Right, I want to move on, and I want to talk now about the work I'm doing as a philosopher. You see, all these questions we're facing, the COVID thing, you know, where's it come from? What should we do? Should we wear masks? Is it all a big conspiracy to trap us in our homes? You know, there's so much confusion in the world at the moment, and it's all on the internet. You can see it on social media. I have good friends that have come off Facebook because they're fed up with its censorship as they see it. And you know, the world is sort of polarizing into different schools of thought, and this is all going on, and that's just about that one issue, a huge issue. I still maintain, trying to do my, you know, rational philosophical overview of the whole thing, the planet absolutely needs certainty and closure on what caused this COVID-19 disease. I am absolutely not prepared to accept this as the new normal. I admire the courage of my friends that are out there saying, I'm not wearing a mask, this isn't normal. You know, I don't agree with their tactics and methods. I think is that there are two possibilities. Applying my Abelard hat of logic and reason, right? There are two logical possibilities the cause of this COVID thing. Either it's an accidental, natural event in nature, it's a mutation that has leapt and caused this tragedy, in which case it needs to be dealt with as best we can by working out the science and studying its, you know, mechanisms and blah blah blah, and just listen to the conventional scientists. That's you know, one thing. The other possibility, and I would say myself it's 50-50 either way, is this was an engineered bioweapons thing that leaked. And I've also seen lots of evidence that point in that direction. You know, much as I admire the work of Sacha Stone in their sort of alternative discussions about the whole thing, they seem to avoid that point constantly, as if they're deliberately set up. And I find it a bit odd that there's a CIA guy, professing to be a CIA guy, sitting right at the heart of that project. It sometimes feels to me more like a disinformation campaign, that Sacha Stone thing, purporting to be a truth commission about the COVID virus. It avoids the fundamental question that needs to be asked. Was this an escape from a bioweapons lab? They never talk about it. Well, if it was, and some people sort of hint it was, and you can find on the internet loads of research, pointing out that it must have been, logically. Well, I utterly suspend judgment on it. It's like the Beirut thing. I suspend judgment. I'm not a expert natural scientist in viruses. I'm not a virologist. I can talk to virologists and I can ask them the right questions, and I can have that debate. And I've tried to. I've written to experts and so on. And just down the road here in France, in Lyon, we have experts in virology that helped fund and build the Wuhan Institute. So we do have people with the knowledge to, really work out what on earth's going on and how to solve it. But in order to find out if this was a military operation, if this was something devised in a lab deliberately, in some form or shape or whatever, we have to activate the Bioweapons Convention. This is a legal process under the UN. Every single state is a member of this in the world, apart from Israel, which I find interesting and rather sad. I think Israel should join, like tomorrow. Every other state in the world, pretty much, I think there's like one rogue state that hasn't joined, something like Rwanda or Burundi or something. Then the UN should have the authority, does have the authority, to demand entry into all their bioweapons labs that are capable of manufacturing such a thing. And a neutral body of UN investigators, would go in and investigate them all. Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, should action this immediately. I mean, for me and the 7 billion people on the planet, 6 billion people on the planet, living in existential angst and not knowing if we're going to die by the end of the year. I mean, I think it's preposterous that it hasn't been done. And I think that the Bioweapons Convention, which was signed in London, written mostly by British diplomats in the 60s and 70s, is one of the standard model peace treaties in the world. And it's supposed to outlaw this kind of nonsense. It's when the world came together and said, look, we realise now we could make biological weapons. And don't forget, it was during the Cold War. It was, Russia and America and UK could have made horrible bioweapons and dropped them on each other. And we wouldn't be here to tell the tale. But they very wisely came together and said, we will never do this. And not only that, they said, if you suspect anyone else of doing it, then this is the Bioweapons Convention. You have the right through the UN to then insist that their labs be inspected. Well, if I was Prime Minister of Britain or Canada or anywhere, I would be on the phone to the UN Secretary General saying, do it. Press the button, the emergency button. And there's no excuse for not doing that. There's no ifs or buts or whys. I'm sorry. As a philosopher, as a Kantian, you work out what's rational, and then you have a moral duty to do what's rational. This is what's called the categorical imperative. As a Kantian, I say this is an absolute categorical imperative. We have to inspect all the bioweapons labs on the planet that are capable of making this thing and find out if anyone's done it. Because here we are all suffering the consequences. And I think the crop of politicians we've got at the moment running these respective countries on vast amounts of money is shameful. If I was Kant, I would be just like, I'd be very, very annoyed with them all. I mean, Germany, the home of Kant, should be asking for this under the Bioweapons Convention. They're a signatory. And they know more than anyone else how important it is to prevent dastardly scientific research going on, because their scientists, under the Hitler regime, did dastardly scientific experiments in Auschwitz and elsewhere, and geneticists and stuff were fiddling around. So they have a moral duty, I would say, to kickstart the Bioweapons Convention investigation. And I hope that next week, when I record my next week's lecture, they will have done it. right, so that's an example of ethics in action, right? You work out the rational thing to do, the Abelardian, this or that, you weigh them up, and then you do it. That's the Kantian thing. There's no ifs and buts. Then you categorically, imperatively have to do it. It's a duty. Right, so what I'm doing is writing a book on ethics at the moment, and it is very interesting. It's like my revisiting a lot of my old philosophical friends and comrades over the years. I'm writing a book called The Ethical Calculus, which is a way of calculating difficult moral choices, either on an individual level or on a collective, national, planetary level, right? We are stuck in the middle of crisis after crisis, and we don't know where to turn. We're like frightened rabbits in the headlights. Well, we don't know where to turn because we've lost our concept of ethics. We've lost our understanding that there is an is and an ought, and there is such a thing as duty, and there's a difference between right and wrong. That's the fundamental starting point of ethics. It's not just choices that are in my interest or in your interest. I have to choose between the two. No, it's a comprehensive approach to working out the individual and collective well-being of the planet. Aristotle described ethics as the science of happiness, and for all the stuff about happiness is the new thing to study, such as my old school Brighton College, the head of that got really into that. I support that, but the only way to real happiness is through the study of ethics, which is why philosophy remains part of the core curriculum in any country that is worthy of the name of a civilized place, in my opinion. Like in France, where it's part of the baccalaureate system, and in Britain, where it's mandatory to study philosophy and ethics. I've taught it there for 10 years. But what we don't have is any sort of agreement between the various philosophical schools on how to calculate the difference between right and wrong. And I'm producing that. This is my revolution. This is my Kantian Copernican moment when I'm revolutionizing the field of ethics and coming up with I think, a fail-safe method for you to be able to calculate the right and wrong in any given situation. So, don't believe me on my word. Read the book. It should be out about, maybe 3 months from now. I mean, it's a lot of work that I'm doing. And what I'm doing is I'm going through all the hitherto existing schools of philosophy and their ethical theories, and I'm really enjoying it. I've been looking at Descartes and his theories of ethics. He was born just up the road from me in a town that's now called Descartes. It's on the same river as where I'm based, La Creuse, in this department of France called La Creuse. La Creuse is a beautiful river. It flows right down to the Loire, and it goes past the town where Descartes was born, way back in the 1600s, I think late 1500s. And he lived to become a great philosopher. He studied at La Flèche, and he got swept up in the 30 Years' War, which was going on in Europe at the time. Horrendous battle between Protestants and Catholics. He was a Catholic, and so he tended towards that, wing of the conflict. But he also ended up living in Holland, which had great intellectual freedom, which was a Protestant country and was on the other side in the Civil War. So he sort of went neutral. He said, to hell with this conflict, I want to find truth. And that is the response of any genuine philosopher. It's what Edward Herbert did during the English Civil War. And I used to live near where Edward Herbert lived in Montgomery and organised a symposium in his honour. Edward Herbert at Cherbury, most important British philosopher at that time, took the same view, during the Civil War. To hell with this Parliament versus Royalist nonsense. I want to study and, get on with my library and my writing. And he wrote a very important treatise on truth. So